Before the first stone was set, a man was chosen to measure eternity. His name was Hemunu, also known as Mon, architect, Vizier, and grandson of kings. Under Pharaoh Khufu's command, he built what no empire has since equaled, a mountain of stone that touches the stars, balanced to the fraction of a
degree.
But behind its geometry lies another story, one of ambition stripped to bone, of devotion that erased the man who carried it. The Great Pyramid still
stands.
Hemunu does not. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the Roots of Fear and get notified every day to discover more stories from the shadows of history. The year was near the midpoint of Pharaoh Khufu's reign when the bent pyramid faltered. A shift deep within the lower casing had forced several courses of limestone outward, sending thousands of blocks cascading down the unfinished slope. At dawn, the air above Dasher was still, white with dust. Workers stood in silence, hands over their mouths, waiting for inspection. In the distance, the king's barge had already appeared on the Nile, gliding toward the site with no change in its measured rhythm. Nephemart arrived first, his son beside him, a boy of perhaps 12, silent and alert. The overseers bowed. No prayers were offered. Scribes unrolled scrolls and began counting the bodies laid in rows beside the collapsed foundation. Hemunu watched as his father stepped carefully among the debris, noting the tilt of the fallen stones, the angle of the fractures, the pattern of the collapse. He did not look at the men crushed beneath them. He asked instead for the quarry lists and the measurements of the surviving face. The smell of limestone and burnt flesh mixed in the air. One copper chisel lay half buried in pale dust beside a hand no longer whole. The boy looked at it longer than he meant to. His father's voice broke through the noise of scribes dictating figures. The foundation remained stable, Nephemart said. Record
that.
Replace the west crew before sundown. Behind him, the captain of the guards asked what should be done with the dead. Bury them near the ramp, Nephemart replied. Do not delay. Transport. His tone was even almost instructional. Hemunu tried to follow his father's steps, placing his feet where the man's sandals had pressed the dust, as if proximity could make sense of the scene. He wanted to ask if the pyramid could still stand. He did not. Children of the royal house did not question their elders in matters of work. By midday, the king arrived. Sinferous attendants carried shades of linen to shield his face from the glare. He looked not at the bodies, but at the surviving angle of the structure. Nephart presented his report without hesitation. Losses are contained, he said. The angle remains correct at 43 degrees. Neferu nodded once, glanced toward the scaffolds, and said, Continue. There was no ceremony for the dead.
No pause.
Orders were shouted, ropes tightened, and the sound of chisels resumed before dusk. The same men who had lifted the wounded now lifted new stone. The rhythm of labor replaced the rhythm of mourning. To Hemunu, the noise was both terrible and certain, the sound of stability returning. When night fell, the site lay under torchlight, casting long lines of shadow across the newly leveled ground. Hemunu sat apart near the trench, where the first stones had slipped. The earth was warm. In the dust he traced a triangle, then adjusted its base until it matched the remembered slope of the fallen wall. Around him men murmured prayers, their voices low and resigned. He did not look at them. He drew again, slower this time, making the lines perfect, the angles precise.
The crushed
chisel lay nearby, half visible under the sand. He brushed it clean with the edge of his hand and placed it beside his drawing as if it belonged there. Behind him the sounds of construction began again.
Ropes stretched, stone moved. The ground trembled faintly as the first new block settled into place. At top the blood-darkened soil, Hemunu watched unblinking as if memorizing the rhythm. He was too young to understand the cruelty of it, but old enough to see its order. That night, the builders continued until the torches burned out. When the last flame died, the boys' drawing remained faintly visible in the dust, not of bodies or ruin, but of perfect converging lines. The year Khufu ascended the throne, the court shifted like stone under pressure. Old administrators were dismissed in a quiet purge, names struck from ledgers, seals broken, offices reassigned. The air in the palace carried the stillness of caution. Each man who entered the great hall left either elevated or erased. Hugh stood at the far end of the line, his linen spotless, his expression unchanging. He had waited through 3 reigns for this moment. The throne room smelled of ink and bronze. Scribes sat on the floor recording decrees as Khufu's herald read them aloud. Every title began with ceremony and ended in absence. Hunu's uncle caniferved as Vizier under Pharaoh but was now stripped of title and land. No reason was recorded. The king demanded new order. Young minds unburdened by failure. When Hemunu's name was called, no one spoke. The herald paused, looked toward Khufu, and continued reading. Appointed Vizier of the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, overseer of all works, seal-bearer of the crown, chief justice of the court. The list went on, each title tightened around him like a band of gold. When the seal-bearer approached, Hemunu bowed. The man pressed a warm lump of wet clay against his chest and stamped it with the royal cartu. A faint impression remained. Khufu's name, half visible in the drying light. He was escorted to the rear chamber where the king waited alone. Khufu was younger than expected. His face unreadable, his voice soft enough to force silence. "You will continue my father's work," he said. "But you will not repeat it. You will build me what cannot fall." Hunu bowed, eyes lowered. "I will require time, majesty. You will require obedience," Khufu replied. From a table beside the throne, the king lifted a papyrus scroll. On it were lists of architects, engineers, and builders from Neferu's reign. Beside each name, a mark, some faint, some crossed in red. Khufu took a bronze stylus and drew one final stroke through them all. "Erase them," he said to his scribe. "If their work failed, their names were never mine." Hugh watched the ink soak through the fibers, each erased name leaving a faint ghost of itself behind. The gesture was simple, deliberate, and complete. The message required no explanation. He would inherit no tradition, no guidance, no praise, only expectation. When he left the chamber, the corridors felt narrower, the air colder. In the outer hall, the dismissed officials stood waiting for their dismissal scrolls, eyes downcast. Hunu passed them without slowing. A servant met him at the stairs with a folded linen cloak, white, unmarked, the color reserved for the king's direct servants. He draped it over his shoulders and felt its weight. Outside, the light from the river reflected off the palace walls like molten copper. A messenger followed, carrying a wooden chest containing the royal seal and the official insignia of his office. Hunu accepted it in silence. The seal's metal surface caught his reflection, distorted, incomplete, but unmistakably his. Behind him, the herald's voice carried Khufu's final decree. "Let all works of the king begin under his hand." The words lingered long after the echoes died. Hunu did not look back toward the palace. His expression did not change. In his mind, the first lines were already forming. Angles, measures, a structure that would outlast breath itself. The plateau rose from the western bank of the Nile, barren and wind-cored, its limestone surface veined like an old hand. Hemunu arrived at dawn, with a small retinue of engineers, priests, and surveyors. They carried ropes, cubit rods, and bowls of water for leveling. It was not yet a place of reverence, only an expanse of rock awaiting definition. The king's command had been clear. The tomb must stand beyond failure. Hemunu intended to make it so by measuring the earth against the stars. The first stakes were set before sunrise. Using a merket and a sighting cord, the astronomers tracked the circumpolar stars as they revolved above the horizon. The plumb line swung, the shadows shortened. The priests objected almost immediately. "You set the line for the heavens," one of them said. "But the heavens are for gods, not for men." Hemunu did not answer. He adjusted the cord, checked the water's reflection, and called for the next reading. By mid-morning, the surveyors had traced a vast square on the plateau surface, each side stretching more than 200 royal cubits. The priests performed their rites of consecration, sprinkling natron and reciting words that had not changed in centuries. The engineers waited in silence, their hands resting on their tools. When the ritual ended, Hemunu stepped forward to mark the north line himself. The priests protested again, reminding him that no mortal dwelling should align with the path of the immortal stars. "Temples face the east," one warned, "where life rises. The west is for death, not eternity." "The west is for the king," Hemunu said. "And the king will face north." His tone was even, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sky met the desert. Khufu had approved his design without hesitation. The priests withdrew in silence, and the work resumed. For 3 weeks, the plateau was scraped, leveled, and measured. Teams poured water into shallow trenches to detect the slightest unevenness. The reflected sunlight turned the ground into a mirror. Men in loincloths moved along the edges with copper chisels, cutting away irregularities no wider than a finger's breadth. Hemunu inspected every adjustment himself. At night, he returned to his tent and studied the records under lamplight, calculating where each corner must fall to align perfectly with the northern sky. The silence of the place began to change. Even at rest it hummed with repetition. The measured tapping of tools, the scraping of stone, the call of surveyors marking distances in cubits and palms. One morning, as the first light broke over the eastern cliffs, a foreman approached Hemunu breathless. "One of the men," he said, "was found beneath the rod." They led him to the site where the accident had occurred. The measuring pole had slipped from its support, driving clean through the chest of the surveyor who had been adjusting it. His body lay at an unnatural angle, pinned to the leveled stone. The blood had pooled, spreading along the very line they had drawn to mark true north. The workers stood waiting for instruction. Hemunu knelt beside the fallen man, studied the position of the rod, then looked up. "Move the marker," he said quietly. "Not the man." The pole was lifted, the body removed, the line remeasured. By noon, the mark of blood had vanished beneath a new layer of limestone dust. The plumb line trembled once more in the waters. Reflection, steadying, then becoming still. For Hemunu, the moment was not tragedy, but confirmation. Even death could be measured into alignment. By the second year of construction, the plateau had become a living mechanism. Tens of thousands of men arranged in ordered labor. They arrived from the Delta, from Upper Egypt, from villages that had never seen stone. Each man received a linen tag marked with his unit, a ration of bread, onions, and beer, and a symbol of Khufu stamped into clay. The overseers called them the king's hands. The scribes called them numbers. The camps stretched for miles along the riverbank. Barracks of mud brick lined the floodplain grouped by work divisions. Stone carriers, ramp builders, cutters, and haulers. Between them stood the storage yards stacked with limestone. Blocks wrapped in palm fiber, and the kitchens where smoke rose from dawn until dark. Along the western edge were the physicians' tents where bleeding, exhaustion, and crushed limbs were treated without question or pause. Disease moved through the air as steadily as dust. Hugh inspected the camps each morning before sunrise. He moved through the corridors of bodies and noise, listening to the rhythm of shouts and hammers. The men worked in cycles, 4 hours labor, 2 hours rest. Then again. He had designed it himself to reduce idleness. The priests who served among them called the work sacred. Murals were painted showing the workers carrying stones as an act of devotion. It was easier to move men when they believed the gods were watching. By midsummer, the infirmary tents were full. The physician, an older man with grey hair and steady hands, approached. The Vizier with a clay tablet of records. "The sickness spreads faster than we contend," he said. "The men sleep in their sweat. The flies breed in the drains. They will not last the season." Hemunu took the tablet, scanned the entries, and returned it. "Then replace them," he said. The physician hesitated. Even stones crack when they are forced too fast. Hemunu's expression did not change. "Then we shall polish the cracks." He dismissed him with a wave. That night, a sandstorm swept the plateau, tearing through the tents. The following morning, the physician's quarters were empty. His tools had been cleaned and folded, arranged neatly on the cot. The overseers reported no sign of struggle. His name was struck from the rolls, his tent assigned to another. Work continued. The labor gangs moved in formation, chanting the hauling rhythm that kept their pace. The overseers carried whips of twisted reed, striking not in anger, but in correction. When one man stumbled, another took his place without pause. At the end of each week, the scribes tallied the living and the dead, their reed pens ticking softly against the papyrus. Hugh recorded the numbers in his own ledger, a separate document no one else saw. He kept it locked in his tent beside the scrolls of measurements and celestial charts. Each entry was brief. Week 32, 186 lost. Average output unchanged. The figures brought him no satisfaction, only clarity. The pyramid was growing faster than before. He walked to the base of the rising structure as the sun set. Watching the lines of men hauling blocks up the ramps, their shadows merging into one continuous movement. The sound of effort was constant, mechanical. It no longer resembled human labor. It was a process like erosion reversed. In the dim light of his tent, he opened the ledger again, wrote a single line beneath the week's totals, and closed it carefully before sleeping. Bodies replaced faster than stone. By the 4th year, the base of the pyramid stretched across the plateau like a second horizon. From its corners, the lines ran true to the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, measured not by guesswork, but by the stars themselves. Every morning before dawn, Hemunu stood on the leveled plain, watching the plumb lines settle in still water, ensuring no wind disturbed the reflection. The slightest ripple, the smallest tilt, was enough to restart the measure. Each block of limestone was cut, placed, and checked with cubit rods to within the width of a thumb. The work moved with the discipline of a ritual. At sunrise, the priests sang hymns to Ra. By noon the engineers recited numbers instead. Faith was now calculation and Hemunu its high priest. When others prayed, he counted. When they rested, he watched the horizon for deviation. The base was a field of white heat by midday. Men with bare backs hauled stones over ramps. Slick with dust and sweat, guided by lines stretched to between wooden posts. At each corner, Hemunu paused to verify that the slope, 5.5 palms per cubit, held precisely. The masons said he could see misalignment where no one else could, that his eyes measured more surely than any tool. He took no pride in their awe. Perfection was not glory. It was obedience. He inspected each side at dawn and again at dusk, comparing shadows, ensuring that they fell at equal lengths. On the 97th morning, he found an error. One stone near the northeast corner jutted outward by half a palm. The difference was invisible to all but him. The foreman of that section insisted the surface was level. Hugh said nothing. He measured again, then turned to the guards and ordered the man held. The workers watched as the foreman was forced to kneel beside the misplaced stone. No accusation was shouted, no sentence proclaimed. Hemunu merely instructed the masons to remove the block, deepen the trench, and set it again. The foreman remained silent until the order was given to lower the stone back into place. Only then did he speak. A brief protest, swallowed by the sound of stone grinding against stone. The process took hours. When it ended, the ground was smooth once more. The overseers marked the adjustment in their ledgers as routine correction. No name was recorded. That evening, Hemunu walked the perimeter alone. The sun was low, its light drawing perfect lines of shadow along the base. He paused at the northeast corner, laid his hand on the stone, and felt no vibration, no imperfection. The plumb line hung still beside him, its chord perfectly vertical. For the first time in months, the geometry was absolute. He said nothing to the workers the next morning. The man avoided his gaze, moving in silence as the day began. When the sun cleared the horizon, its first light struck the pyramid's base. The shadow fell clean, straight, without distortion. Hemunu watched the line stretch across the ground, black and flawless, dividing light from dust. He turned to his scribe and said only, "Begin the next course." The scribe nodded and wrote the date. Behind them, beneath the first layer of limestone, the foreman's absence was already part of the foundation. By the 7th year, the structure rose above the desert haze, its upper tiers narrowing toward the center where the king's chamber would rest. The inner corridors echoed with the sound of chisels striking granite. The blocks quarried at Aswan had traveled hundreds of miles upriver, floated on rafts that strained under their weight. Each one weighed as much as 40 men, now suspended on ropes. Greased with animal fat, they hung above the chamber floor, waiting to be lowered into place. Hemunu stood beneath them, arms crossed, watching the slow descent. The temperature inside the pyramid was cooler than the air outside, but heavy with dust and the smell of oil. The chamber's walls were smooth granite, each face polished to an even sheen. Above it, 5 layers of massive stone beams formed the relieving chambers, an invention meant to absorb the pressure of the pyramid's rising mass. The design was his own, tested only in theory. Assistants murmured about adding more supports. One suggested inserting cedar beams between layers. Another spoke of thickening the ceiling slabs. Hemunu dismissed them all. Weight must learn its own balance, he said. The stone will hold if it is taught to. The air was tense as the workers eased another block into position. The ropes groaned, fibers stretching, creaking under the strain. The stone settled unevenly, sending a shudder through the chamber. Dust fell in thin veils from the ceiling. 2 masons shouted from the ramp above. A moment later, the corner beam cracked. The sound was brief, but deep, like a muffled thunderclap. The block slipped and struck the scaffolding below. When the dust cleared, 3 men lay crushed. Their tools still clutched in their hands, their faces turned toward the walls they had been shaping. No one moved until Hemunu spoke. "Record their names," he said. "Then remove them." An assistant knelt beside him, voice shaking. "The chamber cannot bear more load. The weight must be relieved." Further, Hunu looked up at the fractured corner. The crack was shallow, the damage minor. "Weakness belongs above, not below," he said. "Rebuild it." The crew obeyed. The fallen blocks were replaced by evening, and the last beam was set into position at dusk. Inside, the air vibrated faintly, resonating through the granite. He stayed behind. After the workers left, running his hand along the seam where two stones met. The surface was warm. He listened to the faint creak of cooling rock, the slow exhale of material adjusting to gravity. Outside, the desert wind scraped against the limestone casing. Inside there was only the pulse of silence and the faint echo of his own breath. He sat on a fallen tool chest and counted the blocks. Aloud, naming each by number, not meaning. When he finally rose to leave, he paused at the doorway, the lamp flickering against the uncarved ceiling. The chamber hummed with a tone just below hearing, as though the structure were answering its maker. "The stone has learned to listen," he whispered. He extinguished the lamp and stepped into the corridor, the sound fading behind him until only the weight remained. The royal procession reached Giza at midday, its banners trailing dust across the plateau. Khufu had not visited the site in nearly a year. The workers lined both sides of the ramp, heads lowered, tools at rest. When the king's litter stopped at the base, silence fell so completely that even the wind seemed to hesitate. Hunu stepped forward, his linen robe stiff with dust, bowing once before leading the way up the ramp. The pyramid had risen higher than any structure on Earth, but its progress had slowed. Each course demanded greater precision, greater labor, and greater time. Khufu's eyes moved across the unfinished upper tiers, his expression unreadable. "My father built 2 pyramids before his death," he said. "You have not finished one." Hunu's voice was steady. "Your father built quickly, Majesty, but he built twice." The words were not defiance, only fact. Khufu's staff struck the nearest block, sending a thin veil of dust into the air. "You serve me, not geometry," he said. "This is not a monument to numbers. It is a throne for eternity." Hunu bowed lower. "Eternity cannot lean, Majesty." The king stared at him for a long moment. "You have grown. Proud of your stones," he said. "I see in you a man who serves himself." "I serve the line," Hemunu replied. "And the line serves you." Around them, the officials waited motionless. The air thickened with heat and limestone powder. Khufu stepped closer until their shadows merged. "If I replace you," he said quietly, "will the pyramid fall?" "It will stop," Hunu answered. "The workers will not know whose measurements to trust. Replace me and the pyramid dies with me." The king's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He turned to the overseers. "Double the shifts," he ordered. "Torchlight work until the harvest returns." The decree spread faster than rumor. By evening, fires burned along every ramp. Thousands of torches lined the slopes like a procession for the dead. The workers moved in continuous rhythm, no longer bound to day or night. The tapping of chisels became unbroken, mechanical, without pause for prayer or rest. Hemunu remained on the plateau as darkness fell. From the base, the pyramid glowed like a furnace, each torch flickering against the rising tiers. The sound of stone meeting stone filled the air, steady, endless, precise. He watched the movement of the torches from a distance, and saw not light, but the pulse of a single living organism, obeying his design. Inside his tent, he unrolled the newest plans. The ink had bled slightly in the heat, the lines faint, but unaltered. He adjusted one corner with his stylus, then stopped, realizing his hand was trembling. Outside, the hammers continued, striking at a rhythm that no longer seemed human. Khufu's words echoed in his mind. You serve me, not geometry. Yet it was geometry that now ruled the night, dictating movement, breath, exhaustion. The king had ordered speed. Hemunu had given him obedience. The price was indistinguishable from devotion. By midnight, the torches burned low, replaced by new ones. The plateau no longer slept. Its light stretched across the desert like the glow of a distant fire. The chisels did not stop. The sound had no beginning and no end, only persistence. It filled the valley, unbroken, as if the stones themselves were awake. The pyramid neared its final height, and with it the man who conceived it began to diminish. Hemunu no longer spoke of completion dates or royal decrees. His voice, once sharp and deliberate, had softened into long pauses and half-finished thoughts. He no longer slept in his quarters near the river, but within the unfinished upper chambers among stone and silence. The workers left lamps burning for him, though he often extinguished them himself. He carried his own stylus and slate from place to place, recording measurements even when no one asked for them. The scribe stopped trying to keep pace with his notes. His handwriting had grown erratic, lines breaking mid-word, figures doubling back. At night, he scratched diagrams directly into the plaster, lines intersecting like veins. Every deviation is a wound, he once told his assistant, though no one understood to whom he was speaking. The inner passages echoed differently now. Sound bent around corners and vanished into the half-built voids of the upper galleries. Hemunu tested them by whispering numbers and listening for the return of his own voice. Sometimes there was none. The masons avoided the chamber when he was inside, saying the architect's silence made the air heavy. He began to forego meals surviving on beer and dried onions from the ration stores. His robes were permanently coated with chalk. The overseers found him asleep one morning beside the granite beam that formed the ceiling of the queen's chamber, charcoal still in hand. On the wall behind him, he had drawn a triangle that extended beyond the surface's edge, continuing into empty air. Beneath it, a faint inscription in his own handwriting read, "When a line is straight enough, it disappears." The scribe recorded the words in his log, but did not ask their meaning. By then, Hemunu's conversations had grown abstract. Angles speaking to other angles, walls listening to pressure. He rarely used names. Orders were given by gesture. His assistants delivered materials to wherever he pointed, whether or not there was reason. When questioned about his health, he replied that health was a distraction from accuracy. The body bends, he said. Only stone holds its shape. The sight itself seemed to slow. With him, records show a decline in worker output, though no official explanation was entered. The priests who supervised daily rites reported that he had stopped attending morning offerings, preferring to stand alone beneath the pyramid's shadow as the light shifted across the base. Late in the season, a scribe entered his chamber to deliver fresh tablets, and found him seated on the floor, eyes open, surrounded by torn papyri. The calculations were smeared in brownish streaks, not ink. His right arm was bare, covered in faint red numerals where he had continued his equations after the pages ran out. When the scribe called his name, Hemunu looked up, calm and lucid. "The pyramid is awake," he said. The scribe backed away without speaking. On the workers had begun to gather for the day's first shift. The wind carried the low hum of their chants through the corridors. Inside, the architect sat motionless, his fingers tracing invisible lines on his skin as though the geometry had already claimed him. The day of interment began without ceremony. No heralds, no drums. Only the slower ascent of the procession carrying Khufu's sarcophagus toward the central corridor. The air inside the pyramid was heavy with resin and the metallic scent of newly carved granite. Torchlight flickered along the walls, reflecting off copper tools left behind by the masons. The sound of the procession was deliberate. Sandal steps, the scrape of ropes, the measured breath of men who understood they were not meant to speak. Hemunu walked at the front, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. The burial chamber glowed with oil lamps arranged in precise symmetry. Incense burned in small alabaster bowls at each corner, its smoke rising straight before dispersing into the stillness above the sarcophagus. The priests recited the rites in low tones, names, titles, invocations to guide the king's car into the western horizon. Each word was recorded by a scribe, each pause timed by a water clock. When the final prayer ended, Hemunu gave the order to begin sealing. The workers moved silently, trained for this single act. One by one, the granite plug blocks were slid into position along the ascending corridor. The sound of stone against stone deepened with every push, filling the passage with a low vibration. Dust rained down in thin streams from the ceiling joints. The temperature fell. At the chamber's entrance, Hemunu motioned for the last team to withdraw. "No torch stays lit," he said. The men extinguished the flames and turned toward the outer corridor. He waited until the last footstep faded, then placed his hand on the newly fitted block. The surface was cold, faintly moist with condensation. He turned to his assistant. "Lock it," he said. The man hesitated. "My lord, you'll be sealed inside." "For a moment only," Hemunu replied. The final slab was lowered. The corridor darkened completely. Inside there was no sound except the quiet settling of dust. Hemunu stood motionless, counting his breaths. The air thinned quickly, carrying the faint taste of oil and stone. He pressed his palm flat against the granite and whispered something no one recorded. Outside, the workers waited for his signal. A single knock came from within. They hesitated. Then a second, slower than the first. The overseer raised his hand to continue when the third knock sounded. The last slab slid into place. The passage fell silent. The outer stones were set by nightfall. The torches burned low as the priests completed the final ritual sealing. The corridor filled with gypsum mortar, the surface smoothed to match the surrounding wall. The burial crew, 20 in number, was later dismissed to the Valley settlement. Their names do not appear again in any surviving record. In the king's chamber, the lamps would burn for a few hours longer before suffocating in their own smoke. The air would thicken with incense and ash. When dawn reached the plateau, the pyramid stood complete, its flanks flawless, its summit aligned with the pole star. The workers gathered below, uncertain whether to cheer or kneel. In the distance, Hemunu's tent stood empty, his ledgers and tools undisturbed. The official record states only that the sealing was executed without error. Yet, those who carried the last stones swore that before the passage was closed, they heard the architect himself inside. 3 soft knocks, perfectly measured, marking the end of sound. The flood season had returned by the time Hemunu's muster bar was finished. It stood west of the Great Pyramid, close enough that its shadow reached his doorway each evening. The officials who supervised the burial recorded it as routine. Tomb of the Vizier Hemunu, overseer of works, justified before the gods. No ceremony, no procession, only the administrative act of closure, as if the man had been another column in the ledger. He had been found in his quarters 2 months after the final sealing. The guards reported no struggle. The door was locked from within. Inside, the oil lamp had burned itself to ash. Hemunu was seated, upright at his drafting table, stylus still in hand. The surface covered in half-finished calculations. His eyes were open, fixed toward the northern wall where a single papyrus had been pinned. The cause of death was listed as heart failure. The physician who examined him wrote that the fingers of his right hand were stained with ink mixed faintly with blood. The inventory of his possessions was precise. 1 alabaster cup, 3 cubit rods, a set of bronze compasses, 2 unfinished scrolls, and a copper seal bearing the royal cartu. The last item noted was a drawing of the king's pyramid, dimensions corrected. The scroll lay beside his body, edges curled from heat. On it, the pyramid was drawn in exact proportion, every line measured, every angle numbered. Only one corner bore an alteration. The northern axis shifted by a fraction of a degree. The scribes who reviewed the document assumed it was a drafting error, an unfinished correction. Yet, when surveyors returned to verify the monument's alignment, they found the deviation real. The Great Pyramid stood slightly off true north, by precisely the same fraction recorded in his final sketch. The Royal Archive received the report and filed it under maintenance. No further comment was made. The deviation was too small to matter, too exact to ignore. Hemunu's burial followed standard rites. His body was wrapped in fine linen, the face covered with a square of white cloth. No amulets were placed on the chest. Only his stylus and a strip of papyrus inscribed with his name. The priests sealed his mustabar in a single afternoon. The entrance block was set flush with the wall, its surface polished until the seam vanished. The workman who carried his coffin later spoke quietly of the silence inside his chamber. There were no decorations, no painted offerings, only walls covered in faint charcoal lines erased and redrawn, until the plaster flaked away. In the corner, a stone bench held an open tablet where the beginning of a new plan had been sketched, a square divided into 4 smaller ones, the geometry repeating inward without end. When the officials finished their inspection, they recorded one final note. All affairs concluded, no heirs named no. The Great Pyramid remained untouched. The king's tomb was sealed. The overseers dismissed. The work camps dismantled. Wind moved across the plateau, filling abandoned trenches with sand. From a distance, the 2 tombs, one royal, one mortal, appeared aligned, the smaller echoing the larger, both facing north. Centuries later, when surveyors mapped the monument again, they confirmed the deviation. The pyramid as true alignment drifts from the celestial north by a margin so slight it defies intention. Yet it exists, a fraction measured, recorded, and left unresolved. The archives close with a single line entered by an anonymous scribe. The king rests in perfection. The architect rests beside it.